Hey, welcome. It's good to see a good friendly crew here. I'm so grateful for you all. Jen and I have been working steadfast and hard at kind of, some of our work on climate, and helping this church come a long way. And obviously this is part of our Earth Month. And so we'll be kind of presenting you what's going on, and we'd love your wisdom and ideas. And of course, we're recording this. I know there's some folks like Aaron this morning really wants to help with this. Yeah, so Erin, as baby Catherine's mom, and of course, she works for Department of Energy, and this is her passion. So it's good to see all these younger people getting involved and young families caring about these issues. And of course, we've got some folks online joining us, so that's really great. We're gonna go ahead and get started. Let me see, show the slide. All right, so obviously, Tony, you'll love this. Some of this is coming straight out of your environmental law classroom back in the day. One of the big challenges, of course, is who's responsible for the energy of this church, right? One person pays the bills. We all use it. So no one necessarily knows how much is going into what and what they're doing. And so that creates a situation where many people are using something and no one's really responsible for it. And of course, it can be overused and you can have these other bigger challenges and issues. You also have, you got to shift cultures, right? Some of this stuff is behavioral. And that can be a matter of turning off lights or dealing with the thermostat issues. And so, that takes time. As you all know, shifting culture is hard. Shifting culture in the church, as Jim knows, is even harder. So these are bigger challenges. Obviously, we're also looking not at just our footprint of energy, but as you all know, as a high desert climate, we're looking at our water. And that's really critical here, as it is in many places in the country. Some places like Kentucky, maybe doing a little better than on water issues than we are. And so it just depends on where you are and what you got to work on. So we obviously need to be really mindful of our water consumption here. We also want to talk a little bit about, what is our footprint here in terms of waste, and recycling and composting and those kind of things. We'll be talking more about, and then, we'll be talking more about, being proactive too, how we're going to deal with our rooftop garden, what should be used there and done there. How do we reduce our bigger carbon footprint, not just as a community, but individuals, right? The hope of the church, no different than when I, tell you to go out and to, show kindness, do justice, and walk humbly with your God. The hope is you all carry those seeds out into the world and do those things. Well, the same thing here, right? What changes can you make in your own individual capacities to ensure that we're good stewards of God's creation? And more so, what can we do in terms of making sure that future generations have a world that they can live in, right? So that's kind of the big point. And then, of course, Jim's going to talk about how do we, not just reduce our carbon footprint, but how can we grow our climate shadow and actually make a proactive difference? So, and what are some examples of that? Alice Tinkle, you'll be lifted up as one of those examples. You don't even know. Stay tuned. I'm going to call on you. Jen, do you want to read this piece?
So this is the short video that came out from the UN. Talking about like the 5 main climate facts coming from the COP 28. So let's see if we have some volume and we open this up. And oops, I want that. I want this. So it's talking about. Oh, sorry. Very finicky. Here we go. So nothing too shocking. We know that this year's going to be hotter than last year.
4 degrees warming, and that's fine. That's so far the warmest year since 1850. We have also broken records in main greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. We have seen a boost in the melting of glaciers, and when it comes to global sea ice, we have seen a record low amount of sea ice in the Antarctic area, which is a new finding. We have started seeing growing amount of disasters related to weather. We have seen forest fires. In Canada, they faced their biggest forest fires since they started their recording, and also in Hawaii, they had very devastating forest fires. We have seen both drought and heat waves, and then we had very severe flooding events, especially in India, where we got more than 10,000 casualties. having proper early warning services in place, we could avoid both human losses and also economic losses related to growing amount of disasters caused by climate change.
So that's just a quick overview of the impacts that we have and will see in the future about our climate change. And let's get back to the presentation. And here you go, Andrew. You want to start with that one?
Yeah, so, make sure I get back on camera. Helping my dad with some audio technical difficulties, and now he popped on, so that's good.
Yeah.
To see you, Pops. Always good something behind the scenes, and I'm not just looking at my phone. So, obviously the average person in the US today uses 100% of the energy that their great grandparents used. Right? That makes some sense in the sense of, we were in a much more technologically advanced society. On the other hand, it also is kind of startling to see, how much of that has started to consume our lives, a little bit of a matrix, so to speak. But we also use 3 times more energy than the Chinese do. So, we always want to blame things like this, right, and do that, but we also got to look at ourselves, and that's a big important part of our faith, right? Self-deception, St. Augustine always said the greatest sin of all is self-deception, because you can never cut through any other sin if you're always deceiving yourself, right? And I always think that that's so important when it comes to climate change, because we also have to look at what our country is doing and how we're acting as individuals, and really be honest with that. So, the housing and residential sector in the US uses about 21% of our energy. The majority of that's used for heating and cooling, probably of no surprise. And the average house released an estimated 17,320 pounds of carbon a year. Houses now are 27% larger than they were in 1960. Obviously we're building bigger footprints with more people on a limited planet. So you can start to see why we're having some of the challenges, right? You can look at, the different energy sources. So electricity accounts for 43% of total energy. Right? So when you're talking about energy, you're talking about electricity, gas, nuclear, all of those kind of different forms, coal. So electricity accounts for 43% of your total energy. Natural gas is 42%. So those are obviously the 2 big ones, right? When you say electricity, though, you have to look at what the source is, right? Can it be coal? Can it be nuclear? Can it be wind? Can it be hydroelectric? Can it be sun? Right? That all produces electricity. You have to look at what the source of the electricity is and where you're getting your electricity. That matters. And renewable energy in this country is right now, in terms of housing, is about 7%. We've got a long way to go in terms of trying to get to those numbers. These numbers are a little bit older than 2020. Obviously, that's what President Biden, kind of the energy, act was trying to do. That bigger transition act is trying to, bring a lot of that in, right? Move a lot of things from gas to electric, move a lot more towards solar, incentivizing those tax incentives, put solar on your house to be, get electric vehicles. All of that is trying to shift some of those numbers. The interesting thing is, though, the houses are bigger, the energy efficiency of the houses are better. Makes sense, right? We lived in an old house in Louisville, Kentucky, in Germantown. I kid you not, I swear to God, the wood, it felt like was made of like rulers put together, and it was like insulation of like this. It was like some foam and then another set of rulers and painted over. I mean, Jen and I, if the wind shifted, you'd be like moving in bed. It was so cold. And so that house was, 100+ years old, and not like the Adobes here where they knew what they were doing back then. So, the houses are more energy efficient. We're getting tighter seals, tighter envelopes. The habitat houses, as Rob Lochner's come many times to talk about, are amazing here, right? I mean, you've got -5 HERS rating, which is like, they're so sealed, they've got to actually vent. And they are so energy efficient. So we're sounding like a big city with those sirens in the background. So here's the use of the church. This is average use, of course, nationwide of churches. You see a lot going to cooling, a lot going to heating. Miscellaneous being kind of everything like your elevator, right? That we've got here, your lighting, your cooking. So this is just kind of how churches are generally using energy across the United States. It's going to depend on the church, right? Some churches are very different than others. I mean, it depends on the size of the church. We're obviously, Rob Lochner, my buddy in Habitat, he's over at church, Lutheran Church of the Servant over there by Sam's Club. They're a 1-floor facility. They can put some split units in, they're all solar, very good. We have a massive footprint, right? We have multiple floors, a lot of complexity to us, old building, multiple like stages of that building. And so we got to talk about it.
What is in miscellaneous, Andrew? Because that's the biggest thing.
Miscellaneous would be things like your elevator, right? You know, it'd be things like,
Automatic door opening.
yeah, stuff like that. Honestly, you know, microphones,
Oh,
AV systems left on, stuff like that. You know, just a lot of that kind of stuff that tends to be a little bit of ghost energy is the way you can kind of talk about it, is like, again, no one's responsible, right?
Yeah.
Just, oh, who left the sound machine on all week long, right? And it's just using energy, and that process is running and it's cooling itself, same thing, right? So, you know, some of it's computing, you can see some of that 3% refrigeration lighting. But a lot of that other kind of stuff that we've been looking at, you know, and kind of figuring out, okay, you know, and that's what our energy audit kind of revealed some of that stuff too. You know, our sound systems are great. Elevator. You know, you take the stairs versus up and down all the time, and that thing's moving all the time. That's a big difference, right? That thing's a lot to move, and it takes a lot of energy. So here's kind of what you see in terms of, you know, natural gas, monthly energy costs. A lot of the natural gas goes to heating. That's true in our church too. Right, so natural gas tends to be for heating, a lot of the electricity is for cooling and other kind of things. And you know, some of it's for water heating and cooking, that's also true. We do have an Insta-Hot that's very efficient. So our water heating has now been much improved from where it was, and we've got a couple of Insta-Hots that are making a big difference. You know, obviously, so we can, you know, you can see that UN kind of piece and COP24 about climate. But we, you know, I always say, if you want to care about climate, you know, you need to care about justice and vice versa. If you care about justice, then you have to care about climate. And I think that for so long, our churches and faith communities have gotten into trouble because we bifurcated the two. Here's your social justice committee, here's your earth care committee. And they're different people, and these folks are going to be talking about planting and greening the church, and these folks are going to be talking about immigration and the homeless shelter. Not anymore. You cannot separate the two. And the fact that we have kind of compartmentalized those things and see them as independent has not allowed us to kind of speak in a more forced and unified voice. And, you know, when you start to pair up social justice advocates with environmental advocates, you get a really powerful coalition going, right? And we need that starting in our churches to tear down these walls, because one of the things you're seeing is, of course, like these bigger global immigration issues, right? People are leaving not just because of war and instabilities, but also because of famine, because of water, because of diseases that are spreading more rapidly, like malaria, because those mosquitoes aren't dying off, because they're in warmer temperatures now. So all kinds of issues are driving global migration, are driving global hunger, are driving poverty. And you can kind of see those challenges going on in our world and in our communities, right? I mean, you think about the fires impacting northern New Mexico, right? Where do those people from Mora, San Miguel go? I mean, many of them have nowhere. They lost their houses, they lost their ranches. They don't have an ability to kind of deal with that. FEMA's really slow. And so what is the role of churches? And that's just in our own community, of course, right? And that's not going to ease up. We're going to see more and more of those challenges. We're going to see more and more of those problems in our state, right? What happened when the Rio Grande runs dry? You know, these are bigger things. The Colorado River is already having those conversations, right? That serves millions of people in Arizona and on Colorado now. So what do we do with these bigger challenges, right? What happens with water supplies? What happens with heat and fire, drought? And what does that do to the churches in the Southwest, for example? You know, are we thinking that way? What, you know, we're thinking a lot in terms of migration shelters, right? What happens when a fire breaks loose in Santa Fe in the mountains and starts coming down? Will this church act as a shelter for that? Are we thinking about those kind of things, these bigger climate disturbances, right? And I'm not just talking about, you know, for our children, but what happens when it obviously impacts the reservoirs and our drinking waters? We're having some of these problems right now, right? And we're starting to think like that. So what is the role of churches? How do we provide clean water? How do we provide, you know, maybe they just need a laundry machine, right? Maybe they need showers, right? Running water, just a place to eat. So these kind of things are going to become more and more predominant conversations. Tony's living in Kentucky, right? I mean, you're seeing places across our country right now that are hit by tornadoes, bigger episodes of catastrophic, like hurricanes, tornadoes, fires, right? So how does the church start to think in a way of being a global citizen in that way? And it's not just about migration, you know, being displaced from Latin American countries, but what happens when people are displaced in our own country because of these bigger climate disturbances, as well as all over the world, right? So, you know, obviously this is something that's really interesting. The EPA is also targeted worshiping communities, faith communities, and seeing what difference they can make, right? Because I think they want to say, like, look, you all can make a big difference. They estimate that if every house of worship cut back energy use by just 10%, We'd save about $200 million that could be going to other things like deacons, right? Yeah, there's your line item budget. But also social justice issues, other things, right? We're spending money on energy and things like that when we could be paying for other things in our congregation. You could also be, removing 200 million tons of greenhouse gases. That's the equivalent of 400,000 cars. Pretty much probably about 1 million cars at this point off the road. And that's just 10% reduction. We're just talking about changing behavior, changing light bulbs, doing some of the basic things. If we do that, if every synagogue church did that across the country, just 10%, not huge, not everyone install solar, just making some of these basic changes, you would remove about 1 million, 500,000 cars off the road in terms of pollution emissions. The other thing is they've estimated that you can do 30%, you can make a 30% difference by just doing no cost actions, changing behaviors, doing some really small things, changing the way you operate and maintain. And this is about behavior and sacrifice, right? Our churches should be good at those kind of things. So we started, yeah.
Amazing how much water New Mexico saved once they got that idea going.
Yeah.
And so if we can do water, it seems like we can do other sources
Yes,
also.
that's right. That's exactly right. And we do this in our own lives, right? I mean, that whole kind of waste not, want not mentality has been a little bit lost in our society, right? We're in a society of extremism and kind of throwaway culture, where you just kind of dispose of everything and you just think something's always going to be there next, right? We've got to kind of start to really rein that in and understand, what our impacts are. So let's look at our electricity costs. Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about this slide?
Sure. So we're going to talk about two things. First, we're going to start talking about our carbon footprint. And just to revisit what that means, is the amount of emissions or consumption of the fossil fuels that we as a church or we as an individual consume and the emissions that we produce. A lot of this we can reduce our carbon footprint by making very small changes. We have a variety of different types of light bulbs in this church, way too many.
Yeah.
Everything from neon to fluorescent to compact fluorescent to incandescent. As you go from high energy consumptive light bulbs and you start going towards LED, which produces more light, less heat, it's more efficient, you reduce your carbon footprint. So we've done some of that. And here is, we crunched the data for the last 4 years, from 2020 to the end of, actually beginning of this year. And we've got some data that's missing, but we are seeing the fluctuation of our energy. We're still consuming quite a bit. And we'll go to the next slide where we show the actual consumption. This is the cost. It is costing us an arm and a leg, roughly somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000 a year for electricity. That's a lot. We can make a lot of changes, but we can.
I think there's a question about I've never been in a building ever that has the lighting system we have. So when you turn it on and then somehow it ramps itself up, I'm assuming that ramp up is taking power.
Yes, so those are fluorescents. These all are fluorescent cans, right? And what they do is they have a little ballast inside of them.
Yeah.
That essentially is doing exactly what you're saying, which is heating up to then kind of keep that. That ballast is demanding energy most of the time. And so when you change out these cans, for example, and put in an LED, you cut out that ballast.
Sure.
And you just flip on lights.
Yeah.
But you'll notice, especially in the rendezvous room, it's ridiculous. It takes forever, right?
It's like a
Because
stadium
it's
light.
heating up that ballast, and that takes all that energy just to light up the light. And then the fluorescent light bulb itself is not efficient. So some of what we've had to look at is, and then of course you'll notice you have 6-inch cans, 4-inch cans, 8-inch cans, right? They're all different. And so we're looking at, okay, like bang for our buck. Where do we want to change out some of these different cans? We went with the low, we've done the low hanging fruit, the easy light bulbs, the ones up the second floor with the classrooms, we've changed those to LEDs. But the cans are going to be coming next, but it's exactly that issue because every one of those fluorescent light bulbs, 1, inefficient, 2, producing a lot of heat, 3, has a ballast that's demanding a lot of energy and takes a long time to light up.
But I still don't, because I've gone through the whole thing of switching from fluorescent to LED, but I have never, I mean, and I did construction work for 40 years. I mean, I have never known of a building that takes so long to become illuminated.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a metaphor of the church, right?
I mean, I just don't get it. I don't know. I don't, I'm sure it must have been some sort of state of the art when it was installed, but
It,
it is a dime.
This church has been renovated
like a
piece
building.
by piece by different people at different stages, and so we probably have 50 or 60 different types of light bulbs.
Well-
Our plumbing has been, the same thing.
Okay.
yeah, and we're also dealing with, part of the problem is you have to have contractors that are willing to look towards these things, right? If you have contractors that are, want to upsell you, that's, the greatest light. So we got some really fancy lighting.
Yes, you do.
It's way overkill, right? And that was part of the problem. I mean, I think that, and some of those building projects put us higher on the budget and people just sign it off on it. You gotta have a mindfulness of looking towards these things, of saying, okay, what is this doing long term? Do we really need that? Up on the third floor where all those offices are, you have a lot of that overkill on those hallways.
I just was.
Just, bought lighting that was highest end and very energy inefficient.
That's that.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. That's what we found.
So we've made some small changes and we've started reducing some of the consuming light bulbs. We've changed those out with LED. Now, from last year, from 2022 to 2023, looking back, we actually decreased our energy consumption from electricity by roughly 5,000 kilowatts. That's about almost 4%, which is great. And that's something to brag about because that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is, and you'll probably see this at home, I've been calling P&M 2 or 3 times now. The bills aren't going down. And there's been a steep increase in the rates for both electricity and gas. Now, electricity is interesting. So you'll notice on your bill, you get a credit because they closed down the San Juan coal plant. But then now you'll see this Palo Verde. And I'm like, Palo Verde, that's Arizona. And sure enough, it is. We're buying electricity from the nuclear power plant in Phoenix. So we're getting upcharged quite a bit. So though we reduced our consumption by about 4%, we still paid another $722 more than last year. So you can't look at just the price. You can't just look at you have to kind of look at the balance because obviously we are paying for it. And it's never good to see our bills go higher year after year, and they'll continue to increase. But we are making some positive steps in the right direction.
Well, and one thing I wanted to point out here, so, you can see the different graphs right here. Obviously, you're starting at 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. Those are the most in-depth analysis we've got, right? So if you start at 2020 and 2021, tell me about what was going on in those years.
We weren't even here.
Right. Church was empty. It was a pandemic.
2020 especially.
So there's some really interesting things that we've got to look at, right? So 2020, we largely closed down in March, right? Pretty much all the way until at least the next, if not beyond, right? Except for the preschool. Preschool was in function. So one of the things that's kind of fascinating is that you also then look at it and go, holy cow, we spent $20,000 to $25,000 in energy when the church was largely unoccupied by the congregation and it was largely occupied by the CDC. So there's a couple things you can make that. Yes, there was a lot more energy usage from the CDC. Some of that had to do with you got to keep the windows open, the fans running, the ventilation systems going. Yes. But the other problem is it also shows, dang, that's a lot. That second floor is using a lot of our energy, right? And what you'll notice is when the congregation came back, energy went down. Why are there more people in the building and the energy goes down?
Eyes on the situation.
Responsibility, right? Lights got turned off. Things weren't left on all over the weekend. So we've got to shift cultures, not just in the church, but the CDC. We've got to look at all of that, right? And you have to just, we have to be honest with what happened here, right? Like, and some of that is dependent, right? Some of those numbers got driven up by, ventilation, fans, windows open, all that. You have to do that, right? That makes sense, right? But the other challenge is there were some other challenges of shifting culture, right? And the CDC at the second floor has 100 people coming into it pretty much every day with kids, right? But the elevator is being used a lot. You got parents moving up and down the parking garage lift, right? We're not just talking about the elevator, lift that gate every day, a bunch of times, right? For those parents. So you have all that energy being used, and that was what was going on. When the congregation wasn't even here, our energy bills actually went up. Congregation came back, you had a lot of those things starting to be curtailed. So we have to work together with the CDC to kind of look at these issues, right, as a whole. Because they use, $20,000 to $25,000 worth of energy when the congregation was largely not here. When the congregation came back, it dropped a little bit. And then I think that 2023 is kind of the most indicative number, right? It's a little just tap ahead where the congregation's now in full swing, CDC is in full swing, everything's back to kind of up. Our consumption went down, but our cost went up because of what Jen was saying. But I think we gotta look at it all.
20 cost, Andrew, would that have been, I'm assuming that we must have been doing, like, the system had to have been running constantly to bring fresh air. And
It-
all of
I mean, the big
2020,
problem-
cut back on that. in
The big problem
2022?
was a lot of heating and cooling, right? You're running the heater while opening the windows.
Sure.
But you're also not turning it off. You're leaving things on over the weekend. The lights are left on.
The windows were left open.
Windows are left open. I mean, a lot of stuff going on. You're heating the whole outdoors for the next 2 days.
Yeah, that's true.
Leaving it on during the winter, right?
Yeah.
And so, or just leaving a window open. And so these things we kind of had to rein in and control,
Okay,
right?
sure.
But also, we had to change out all the lighting up there. That was the first thing we targeted because they get the most use up there with 100 kids 5 days a week from, 8 in the morning till 5 o'clock. You target that and you try to reduce those uses. We've been able to do some of that. So, but that's something that I think is really important for the congregation to see is, okay, we got to look at the bills and then we got to look at who's using what and where. Right?
So yeah, they're here 90% of the time. They 90% of, I mean, it makes sense, but we worked with Marie and Mike and said, maybe one more walkthrough on a Friday afternoon, make sure all the lights are turned off, all the windows are closed, and the doors are closed. Because I've come in sometimes and I've seen a balcony door wide open in the wintertime and snow's blowing in, and I'm like, well, this is Sunday, and it was left open since Friday.
And it gets back to that tragedy of commons, right? If no one has to pay for it, no one's responsible for it.
Absolutely.
Right, so then the key is how do you start to help people be responsible for it? Well, you either make them pay for it and you'll see people change real quick. Or you start to talk like this, and we're trying to do both. I think we're trying to figure out that happy medium. Obviously, the CDC does great mission and ministry in our community. We really want them to be, doing what they're doing. At the same time, we've got to kind of work together because
Yeah,
at the end of
it's
the day.
incumbent on them to be aware of what their footprint.
Right, and at the end of the day, who's paying for it, right? It's a congregation paying the bill. Ann and them, I think, are taking over, a good chunk of that now. And those conversations, but obviously if you're dipping into your reserves every year as a session, energy, $30,000 of that needs to be looked at, right? And you got to think about that in those ways. This shows you the data of what's actually consumed. And that shows you we're on the right track, right? It's going down every year, even though more people are coming in. That's a good thing.
Boy, that's a good chart.
Yeah, that's a good chart. And this is why we do this energy on this, right? I mean, this is just math, basic empirical stuff, like you can't really argue with it. You can see it.
Automatic on and offs have been amazing.
Thank you.
I mean.
And
like,
Rob did all those for
awesome.
free. Rob Lochner has done all that stuff for free for us.
It's like, who did that?
Rob Lochner from Habitat.
Oh,
So he installed all that. Here's our gas cost.
So gas is another problem, and this is mostly heating of the building. What else do we have running on gas?
Kitchen,
Kitchen,
stove,
stoves. But
hot water heaters.
we made some dramatic changes. Rob Lochner over at his church, the Church of the Servant, they are completely off of gas. They have removed all functioning units for gas, which is great because our gas, we did a great job reducing it. We reduced between 2022 and 2023, we reduced our gas consumption by 45%.
Whoa.
We reduced almost 4,000 therms units of natural gas. But the price of natural gas has skyrocketed. So we only saved $200.
Oh.
So we made such a drastic, but could you imagine if we didn't make these cost saving cuts, our bill would have been twice as high. It would have been in the $16,000, $17,000, $20,000 just for gas.
Well, and gas is going up on average about 35% a year.
And why is that?
Market fluctuations, the ability to, I mean, all kinds of equations that go into it, right? But what I will generally say is energy goes up, doesn't go down.
No, it doesn't.
Rarely does it ever go down. So, you're talking electricity and gas and then going up, electricity about 3% a year. And so energy is more demanded too, right? I mean, Los Alamos National Lab wants to run a power line through the Colorado Del Rio to do more supercomputing, to do more of this, to do more of that. And instead of like looking at more efficiencies that they can do as a massive lab with, hundreds of buildings, They just want to run more power, more power, more power. And that comes out of the P&M grid, right? That comes out of Palo Verde. So, you know, it's just more power, more power, more power is our mentality in this country. And it's like, look, we gotta stop and reflect on like, what are we doing here, right?
So the environment's thanking us for our efforts. You know, we've done a really good job. But, you know, if this goes to session, they say, well, we've spent $500 more than last year on utilities, you know, at least, because we're not being incentivized by our power companies.
But does nobody notice that there was a 45% decrease in consumption?
Not yet.
And our bill went.
You're the first to know.
I mean, it's like.
Well, and we're
That's
gonna
to say
tell them,
something.
so when we're gonna present this to session this month, my goal is to say, here's what your bill would have been had you not done this.
That's a great idea.
Because this is what we actually saved by doing what we do.
Right, and so we made small steps. We have a lot further to go. Now, something that we were talking about, so we're talking fossil fuel consumption, we're talking about our carbon footprint. Something else that we're also needing to discuss, and this is what Andrew was speaking about, like sowing the seeds, taking them outside, you know, if you have, you know, your lit candle, you don't put it under a bushel barrel basket. We want to talk about climate shadow. And a climate shadow is kind of a newer terminology. It's a ecological shadow of sustainability. It's your consciousness, your conscious efforts, your daily actions. So as you go throughout life, your shadow follows you, whether you realize it or not. And when we talk about your climate shadow, it's your daily choices. Did you come to church and get a disposable cup thinking, oh, I don't know if these cups are clean. I don't know how long I'm gonna stay here. I'm gonna get a disposable one, I'll take it with me. Or did you use a cup, a mug from church, or bring your own mug? These are kind of small little choices that aren't really a make or break deal by any means, but it's your mindset. Like how connected you are with nature? What is your connection, your view with the natural world? Do you go out in nature? Do you enjoy it? Do you explore it? Do you love it? Do you protect it? This is sort of this continuum that we want to encourage in our community, both church and larger community, because as we become more mindful of how we interact with our environment, we start to change behaviors very slowly and almost unnoticeably, but other people will take notice. So climate shadow, you want your shadow to grow. Think of like a big ponderosa tree in the heat of the summer. It grows tall, it casts a large shadow. And people find hope, refuge, and growth underneath that shadow. You're sheltered from some elements. So young saplings can grow in the shadows of a big ponderosa. Shadows are a good thing. It's not like a climate doom or gloom type shadow, but it's a growth shadow. And now shadows can go both ways. You can grow your shadow by being more eco savvy and conscious, and become encouraging and hopeful and inspiration to others. Or you could be a climate denier, shrinking your shadow and kind of making it harder for others, especially if like you're a leader of a conservative church and you don't believe in climate change, and you say, oh, you know, let's go back to the Bible, and you know there are floods and fires and a devastation back then too. Don't worry about it. Well, you're diminishing your congregation's ability to grow and change and become more sustainable, because you are taking away that hope, that inspiration, and that, you know, room to grow. Now, the other day I was talking to Andrew's mom, and she always has great comments. But she said, hey, have you talked to Alice lately? Yeah, I know, right? And thanks for.
What are you doing, Alice? I'm just not in it either.
And she said, you know, I'm so tired of those dishwasher cubes that you throw in that are made out of plastic, and the plastic melts and gets into the water and it cleans your dishes. But you know, Alice told me that there's this place in Santa Fe, I think it's Soap and Supply, where you can get refillable
Oh,
soaps.
you can. My Pilates instructor does that.
So.
So will you, Mary?
Yeah.
She's got the facts of all different soaps. And since I've started going there, they are now returning those vats to be refilled, and she's really excited that that's.
And they do shampoos and
They
soaps.
do
and dishwasher.
Every,
Chantal says.
You don't have to
and it
disclose that
doesn't
every
have
time.
any artificial anything, like it doesn't have artificial scents or
Chemicals and.
any of that stuff, so.
and you know, those
Like
little
those.
strips you can buy for, washing machines. I had read that those have plastic in them to form their shape. And so I asked her about that, and she said, well, they're, they come in like a, so you don't buy a jug of plastic.
Oh,
Washing machines, so you buy these little strips, you just tear off and put in, but to form their shape and keep their shape. Some of the brands have plastic, and she doesn't have any of them yet. She said they're working. They'll get it someday, but even the ones with no plastic have some terrible.
someone's gotta make it hard. That's not.
Yeah, but she said they get close, and she said when they get it, we'll have.
What is it? So Maureen, your climate shadow, I'm lifting up Alice here. Mary, your shadow is getting much bigger, Alice, because your actions at home, your individual action has inspired Mary to want to go and shop there, get eco-friendly products. She sends it on to me, and I'm like, well, that's a great idea. I'll bring it to you. This
Where
is
is it?
grassroots
I
change.
don't know where in town. Do you know where in town was it? Chantal told me.
Do you know where Mother Mitchell is?
I don't.
Oh, no, do you know where, what's the inn across the street?
We'll get it for you.
Okay.
But we'll make sure.
I want to make sure Tony can find a soap place too in Louisville. But not much shampoo, Tony, so you're good. So look at that. That's a climate shadow right there. Look at that. Perfect. This really is indicative, right? Look at the therms used. I mean, that shows you usage. You can't just go by price, you gotta go by usage. Right? Like that's a huge shit.
So how do you get rid of all their vats?
So we've been monitoring the thermostats a lot. We've been working with Bill
I mean,
Ecken.
the church that has zero. Yeah.
So they moved to split units. So what they do is they now, instead of having a huge boiler system, which is like an unbelievably complicated system that has $1 million, IT apparatus around it. It's nuts that what we had. They moved to split units in individual rooms, and basically those are solar powered. So it's all electric. So we have them in our house. That's what we do. The only, and we're moving away from gas too. So a lot of people are getting rid of their electric hot water, or getting rid of their hot water heater, moving to an electric hot water heater, right? A lot of people are moving towards no longer having a boiler and just having these split units, right? Which is, basically is a blower that can go in each room, and it has a heating and a cooling, and you can set it. And they have compressors that are on the outside of the house. And so our house, for example, has solar panels. We have split units, and so we do all our heating and cooling, and all of that's done by the solar. We switched out all our lighting, so we have all LED, and our next big switch is gonna be our hot water tank, right? And the idea is to go to electricity, so that can also run off of solar too. Then we get rid of gas entirely. The only thing we'll have left is actually a gas stove. And so, some of that stuff is the shifts that you're seeing, and you're seeing a lot more of those, electric stoves and stuff like that. You put in, there's incentives. The interesting thing is when we installed solar in our house, because of the state tax credits and the federal tax credits, the system itself was about $22,000. We ended up paying $6,000 for the whole thing,
Wow.
installation and everything. And now our energy bill is literally like just these fees and nonsense for being $20 real. But we, our energy bill before that was $100 to $200 a month. So, we've already made our money back on the whole solar system, plus got the tax credits, plus moving all these changes. So it can be done, and it is affordable, and you can save a lot of money on the tax side.
And it's talking about these things, and doing these things, and making them visible. That grows your shadow, inspires others to make change, and we have a cumulative effect, which is what we're aiming for. So to be proud that we reduced our consumption by 45%, we need to make that clear. We need to make that known to the whole congregation. Our composting efforts, all of these things are making us move forward.
So if you look at, here's our 4 year.
I'm sorry, can I ask one? So the split units, do they have their own individual, does it come integral to the system to have a solar panel associated?
You don't have.
Or just have to do solar for?
Yeah, you can, you can, right? So and a great example is it depends on what your energy company is, right? Kit Carson is running almost all on solar up in Dallas. So if you have an energy company that's running all off of solar, then you probably don't need to put solar on, right? You just tap into that grid. Now, people are making other changes up there around water, around other things to reduce their footprint. Here, P&M is not near what the governor wants them to be at, like 50%, right? They're, kind of hovering around that 13 to 20%, depending on what substation you're tapping into for your power. This was a big thing that I learned with Lano stuff. They're not near where they need to be on the renewable side. They're also tapping into nuclear, as Jen said. So you got a lot of complexity with that. So if you're on the P&M grid, which almost all of us are, then you may want to consider that, right? And your grid will actually move backwards and pump into the system.
Yeah, we have solar, I mean, I don't know why.
Yeah, so split unit is basically just replaces your boiler, and replaces any swamp cooling or AC. We also got rid of swamp cooling, which is using a lot of water, right? Which is not great in the desert, which is a lot of houses around here. So if you get a split unit, you're basically using refrigerated air, that's in a coil. That kind of is a cooling coil that runs through it. And so that same unit that's a heater can also work as a cooler, and you just flip it from heat to cooling. Or
They actually look the same. I mean, you can't really tell it's a split unit because we have those.
the only thing that really splits it is the compressor on top, right?
They were up on the
And-
roof. You can't
And the nice
see
thing
them.
is, like, for example, last night, we didn't turn ours on at all in our bedroom. Brooke, we didn't want her to get really cold, so we had hers run on heat. But hers ran on heat, ours was off. So her heater was on, we can set it exactly the temperature we wanted, monitor all that. And our room, we didn't use it. So we were only heating that part of the house and only the sleep. So you have the ability to control zones like that. So anyway, long story short, here's where we are at electricity. We're spending close to 22 grand a year on electricity for 4 years, right?
Average, yeah.
6 grand, so close to, pushing 30 grand for this church. Even though we maybe, we would be at 30 grand for sure. if we
No,
had
we
the
would be
machine.
closer to 50.
Yeah, it's crazy. But think of that money, Mary, what could the deacons do with that? Elise, George, like the social justice committee, right?
We do.
Alice, Prayer Shaw, like that money could be used in so many better ways than paying B&M and the gas company in New Mexico, right? Like if you all, no one wants me to get up in front of the congregation and say, hey, we give our gifts to God and we treasure these things. And people say, hey, write the check to P&M, right? No one wants to give money to the gas company. You all are already giving money to the gas company in your own ways and the electric. They want to give money to God's good work. So if we can find ways to reduce this stuff and shift that money to mission and social justice, to deacons, to our youth ministries, all of more scholarships at the CDC, let's do that, right? Like
Plus, it helps the earth.
and it helps the earth, right? Like, and we all don't burn down. So like, these are exactly why I'm passionate about this, right? Like it's the intersection of all these things, right? We can offer better care. We can do more justice. We can care for the environment. We can care for our kids, and we can spend our money and be wise stewards of that. Right. When I talk about stewardship, I don't just talk about fiscal stewardship. I talk about creation care stewardship. We have to see the two as highly interrelated. And that's a bigger shift that we need to make. So what have we done? We replaced the LED lights on the second floor, right? So we replaced all the lighting out with LEDs on the second floor. Those lights are on, all the time with all those kids coming in, all the classrooms, right? So we did all that. That's some of the shift that you saw. We've also added motion detecting lights in the upstairs bathroom. Those lights got left on all the time, especially over the weekend. The teachers would leave on Friday, that would be on. So boom, 15 minutes later, those lights turn on. They're motion detector. We put in the sensors in the bathrooms. Deacons love to add that now, right? We're gonna put another. We put another one in the other pantry closet. We're gonna try to put them in the bathrooms down here.
Uh-huh.
We're probably between us. We're not in code with what the heck the electricity is going on in those bathrooms. We opened up the panel. We're like, oh boy. So we put the panel back on and we're like, yeah, we're gonna need to upgrade a little bit to the electrical world here and see what's going on here. But if you think about it, it wasn't just the lighting, right? It was the fans too. So, up in the upstairs bathrooms, the fans were running, 2 lights were running. Anytime those lights were left on, that was just running all the time. And it can literally be left on a Friday afternoon, the teacher uses it, and I don't come in until Sunday morning and see it, and it's been on that whole time, right? So that kind of stuff has changed. We tinted the entire south and west facing windows on the 3rd floor. That makes a huge difference, right? You get in that heat of the summer, that's going to fluctuate your thermostats. Every one of those, rooms was changing. It's made a great difference in my office. My office, I don't really need to mess with the thermostat at all. Like, it's just not hot in the summer, which is really, really good. If you all haven't done tint on some of the windows in your home, I highly recommend it. We have a great tint lady here that's amazing. She does a really good job. It looks really professional. You can get all kinds of different levels, but really soft that you can barely notice. You can get mirror tint, all of that stuff, but it makes a big difference in our house. We had 3 massive south facing clear story windows. And it would get hot. And it was nice in the winter, but in the summer, the winters are getting shorter, summers are getting longer. And it was getting hot. And so we tinted those windows and it's made a big difference. I also tinted it in my office. You know, because it would also do the same thing, get really hot. That office doesn't have really its own thermostat, and so I'd either have to tweak another thermostat. Or, you know, and then also at the same time when I'm doing Zooms and that like lights coming in, you can't see me. So it was really good, and it was really cheap, right? Really cheap. So we
I'm
typically,
assuming our glass at the church is the real high performance glass either.
no, a lot of
Actually, most of the rooms are needing repair or replacement. However, tint will still go a long way. So we tinted the first floor and we tinted the third floor on the west and the facing windows that have the strongest and hottest sun coming through. What we're still looking to do is to tint the second floor. And that's where we had a lot of issues with the north side of the classrooms. The north side classrooms had the heat going because they're on the cold side. But then the south side of the classrooms had the AC on because it was too hot in the sun. So you had, thank God it was an Explorer system, but you had two heating interests at the same time. Now, if you tinted that and you reduce that heat, then we can also reduce a lot of the energy waste.
So, the other thing we've done is churchwide composting. If you haven't picked up composting bags, they're right out here. If you're not already doing composting, we have composting bags available. We put out 2 big bins. My goal, you know, when we started this last year, there was like 7 or 8 trash bins going out every day. And I'm like, what is the witness of this every week that people drive by our church, right? Like, that is not showing great stewardship. Some of that's baby diapers and stuff that we can't, you know, really move around with the CDC. But, you know, some of that stuff is food waste. Some of that stuff is not, you know, a lot of recyclable stuff. So we've really tried to work on kind of reducing that footprint. Composting is huge. You know, food waste and the production of methane is massive. It's a really good way you all can reduce your greenhouse gas emissions if you're not already doing it. I mean, you get a rotisserie chicken, put the bones in, right? You know, you cut strawberries, put the tops in, right? You got tomatoes that, you know, went bad, put them in there. Pickup bags here, those bags are fully compostable. You just put them in, tie them off, throw them in our compost bins down in the garage. This is free to any of the church members. You all want to compost? Pick up a bag. We have a little bucket that we have in our house. We just drop it every time we cook a meal. Throw the scraps in there. We bring it, you know, go by the church once or twice a week, drop it right off, dump it. So it's free to you. You can also drop it straight up in Unity Resources if you want to. That's in the compost. We got free bags for you. If you haven't taken those and tried it, try it. You know,
I've tried it and I learned something new every day that can go in.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
this morning, I thought, my cat is so finicky and like chilly. And
You can put her right in.
yeah, no carcasses, no carcasses. Yeah, Roxy's going in the compost. I have to get all of them compost.
she'll fill out the bag.
Yeah, Roxy's gone. So, Brooks is also finicky when she eats, so having a toddler, it is a great thing to do. I mean, toddlers, you know, and that was a big problem with the CDC, right? Like, how do we get, you know, I mean, sometimes that kid will throw down a whole chicken sandwich and all their French fries and all their vegetables, and the next day they eat the top piece of the bread and the rest just sits there, right? And it's toddlers, they're crazy. And so then all of a sudden you're tossing all that food and that food goes into the landfill and becomes methane and becomes more of a problem. So you wasted not only the food, the production and the transportation of it, then you're creating it on the back end. When you compost it, you actually have better soil. The thing that they found about composted soil that's especially important here is that it holds 70% more water.
That's really.
So it's really water efficient soil and you need more of that soil here, right? So that's a really good thing. So we started that going on, we're working on that. It's gonna take constant tweaks. You know, you all be smart with it, right? Throw good things in the compost bin. You know, we want to monitor what goes in there. It's pretty easy, but sometimes I'm like, why is there an aluminum can in the compost?
Oh, dear.
Seriously. So just, you know, our congregation, we've got some work to do, but we'll get there. And then we also replaced the flooring in the new youth room, and we did all sustainable flooring. Jen picked up this really good eco flooring, and to do all that. So we've kind of been mindful in our decisions too.
Is it core or is
What did you
it
get?
bamboo? What?
It is, it's an EcoSmart laminate that has very low chemicals in it, so there's no off-gassing, and it's a sustainable wood.
Oh, okay.
So there's some things we still need to do. Right, tint on the second floor. So we're gonna try to work with Ann. Part of the challenge was they have to be able to see the kids. Can't have like a mirrored tint, right? So we gotta get the right kind of tint for that, so that way we can stay in compliance. So we're gonna try to work with her on that. Get that second floor tinted that's facing that south particularly. We kind of work with her to make sure that they stay in code and at the same time, we keep the energy bills down. So that's something to come. We need to replace our elevator lights, right? That elevator light's on 24/7. You know, we got to get those LED bulbs in there. Motion detection in the first floor bathrooms, as I said, that's a little bit of an electrical issue. We got to work there. We're determined to do it though. Replacing our fluorescent lighting in Pope Hall and the Rendon room. Those two rooms get used all the time for all our services, for all our.
And it's
banquets.
horrible lighting.
And it's not great, and it takes a lot, right? So we're gonna try to replace those cans. We gotta look at, you know, how to do that. And Rob and I kind of go gorilla, we just do it. Like a lot of people just. That's the other thing is a lot of people just like the changes when you do them. You start contemplating them too much and should we have a motion detector in the bathroom or not? How long should it be set for? And then you just do it for 15 minutes and everyone's like, oh, that's great, right? So some of this stuff is like, this is basic, right? You know, you're changing a light bulb. They always said, how many Presbyterians does it take to change a light bulb? Change, right? So there you go. You know, the other thing is to create a culture. You know, we're trying to shift this culture, right? We got to, you know, help our members understand composting, help our, you know, members put the right things in the compost bin. You know, can you reuse things? So down in the bins below, we have all kinds of things. You can recycle clothing, recycle shoes. So we're doing things through TerraCycle where we're recycling hard to recycle things through friction. We're also trying to work with the Children's Museum to get all those food pouches and stuff that are thrown away that all the kids eat, those little applesauce pouches. We're doing all that too. So we're going more community wide. We're working with other churches too. We're going to start working on our heating and cooling adjustments, continuing to monitor that, right? Really, you know, use that system to its finest. Jen's going to get trained in that system with Bill Eklund. It's not just one person. The big thing that they found in a lot of buildings and churches is you have to have an energy zone. Who's responsible for this? And you know, who's monitoring? If no one is, or multiple people are, and no one's responsible. So you need to have more, you know, Bill Eklund goes out of town and the heat's running and the cooling's running. The heat's on the second floor. The first floor is cooling. All the cool air is going up into the second floor and it's more heating. It's a nightmare, right? So you have to have multiple people trained in these systems to kind of watch it if there's an issue and flag it if there's a bigger problem. And you also don't want to burn out your units. It's not good for maintenance. It's not good. I mean, those things are hundreds of dollars. I mean, so we're not just talking energy. You're talking about the use of these units.
So I mean, kind of, do we have, I'm sure we must have, Bill Upland at the Eustis does, but do we have a preventive maintenance like plan?
Yes.
What is, like,
Yeah.
is it written down somewhere so that somebody
book.
actually would
It's a
know?
book. It's a book, but
Well,
it's.
be several books.
Problem is very few people know we need consistency in that and you need monitoring of that, right? And you need maintenance of those systems over time.
Yeah.
Pay attention to that for a long time.
Right, and we need good people to do the work. That's the other thing is we've had some trouble with some of the contractors that we bring in for these things. We need good people to actually change out the filters, right?
Oh, geez.
Stuff like that. But then, you know, when you change out the filters, you also got to do some other things. You can't just change out the filters, right? So we've had some of those challenges. So we're working through all that with facilities. Renewable energy, you know, so the key is with all this, right? You want to reduce your footprint. Instead of buying 150 solar panels, if you needed only 75, get 75. So if you cut down the amount of energy you're using, you want to do that first. Then you want to take proactive steps to try to think about renewables. You know, we've had an estimate for our solar panels up on this building, you know, we're talking maybe, we could probably reduce our energy use by 60–70% of this through renewables based on the roof size. And so that would leave you with maybe a 30% bill maximum. And that whole system would probably cost around $150,000. Now that's one estimate. There could be cheaper ones too, and that systems are evolving. Right? The panels are evolving. I mean, even from last year, they've gotten better corporate panels that are bigger and capable of more energy production at a lighter weight, right? So we kind of looked at all of that. We're also looking at remaintaining the roof, right, and redoing the roof, and you want to do that before you put a bunch of solar panels. So we're trying to think about those things strategically over time.
And there's incentives for churches now to keep going solar.
Yeah, so one of the big problems before was you could get a tax credit, but that didn't really matter if you're a 501c3 nonprofit, right? But now what they do is they actually give the tax credit to the business, and the business can pass on the savings to the consumer. So we could actually save money because the business that we contract with solar to do that. San Miguel Chapel, the oldest church in the entire country, just put solar on. So anyone who says, well, this church is old and complicated, that's nonsense. The oldest church in the country just did solar in our community. And they had like a catacomb cavern tunnel under that church that I saw with the electrical, like Holy smokes. So churches are doing this. I mean, the oldest church in the country, in our own community, and they've been getting a lot of news stories, right? It's good press. So that's happening. You know, the other thing is more electric vehicles are moving, right? Do we need charging stations in our garage? Would that be a smart thing to try to think about ahead? Do we want to try to get, parking, and what does that look like for the church? I'm working with facilities. Parking is a big issue here. We all know that. That is a persistent issue.
Well, that's a Santa Fe. issue.
It's a Santa Fe issue. It's a downtown church issue, and we're the only downtown church without our own parking lot. So we got to think about these things strategically. And if we do something like that, should we do it all as a capital campaign where you put renewable energy in, you deal with parking, deal with stucco, you deal with roof, and you try to fix all these things and wham. And maybe you put a potential couple charging stations in there, and church members can charge for free. Maybe members of the public that we're not using it, you can charge them and make some money. Who knows? So there's all kinds of options. And then we got an ongoing water on the phone too. So that's kind of where we're at. I think we made some good headway. We're doing some good things. Need your all's help though. We need to push the leadership of our church. We need to push our session. We need to say, look, I want my money going to where it matters. I want you all to be smart with this stuff, right? We're dipping into reserves for the last 4 years, $30,000 out of, sometimes we're dipping 100,000, 150,000 in. 30,000 of that's going to electricity or in gas. So can we cut that down? Can we reduce that by 80%, right? Potentially with all these changes. What would a capital campaign look like? Where people are saying, I want a solar panel dedicated to Jim Brown. That's Jim Brown's solar panel up there. That's Bruce Black's solar panel. Each person buys a solar panel, and we got, every member of our congregation, we've got a solar panel named after them, and we'll see which one goes off.
Spark the good.
Right. So, we do that. I mean, it's, you all laugh. We've got Kimballs, we've got pews, we've got chairs, we got rooms. I'm like, I'd rather have a solar panel dedicated to me than any of that stuff. That's just me. So, I want to, give energy to future generations, right? But, things like that. And people like stuff like that, right? I mean, I think we'll find a lot of opportunity for giving an opportunity for stewardship if you're saying, hey, this is what it's going to go to, and we're going to make a difference. The other thing is we're an educational facility as well as a school, right? So what happens when you have kids, 100 of them a year, learning about these things, right? Composting, about renewable energy, about these efficiencies. The light sensor turns on and off. The water's not running in the bath.
Where do you put the dedication plaque?
Yeah, one, I'll get you your own for it.
Right in the garden.
Yeah. The other thing that actually is really cool is we got certified by the National Wildlife Federation, which is you all and I work for, as a wildlife gardening area, an urban wildlife setting, because of the natural gardening and landscaping we've done. So we've done a ton, thanks to some amazing volunteers. Suzanne and Bob have done amazing stuff.
I contact her every time they come popping out again and say, I'm thinking about you.
Yeah, so we got certified as a wildlife garden and habitat because of the natural, and think about it, I mean, there's not a lot of green around here. But we got good stuff for pollinators, we got good stuff for birds, we got good stuff for insects, and that's really important in these kind of scenarios, right?
Have we had a coyote visit yet?
We had the moose down here. We had some we've had some raccoons and we've had a fox. We've seen some of those things. So yeah, there's animals around here, and we'll catch them on our ring cameras, especially by the parking garage. You'll see some of that stuff. Yeah. And I want to say somebody even had some bears coming in here, or maybe a year or two ago. Which makes sense. I mean, they're coming out of the mountains and moving towards the river. So it's good to have, but it's really important in these urban areas where there's not a lot of green to have those. And obviously, it's good to have plants to offset carbon in downtown areas with more traffic. So
the one thing I do have to ask Andrew, because I do think the church should do as much as we possibly can, but we will always with a look to, because our church is very much architecturally something that should be maintained very carefully.
That's right.
I mean, it is,
well, and we're in that.
or not, we could get earth, oh shoot, the name just left me. I mean, they worked on our church before.
Yeah, so we're also in the historic district. So the good thing about the San Miguel Chapel project and the people who did our solar estimate, for example, like all the panels have to be at a certain height.
Yeah.
They can't be seen from certain areas. You've got to do all kinds of things. And yeah, they looked at all that and we're all good. You got to go past the historical review board and all that stuff because of where we're located. Yeah. Yeah, so it takes.
Oh, no, it does. Of course.
It takes time, but the good thing is they did it with the San Miguel Chapel, which is, talk about historical and downtown Chisholm. So, you know, they were able to kind of maneuver all that and got it done. And it wasn't a big problem. But they're able, because of the technology and because of the way the panels are now designed, and they're not mounted on the roof. Like, that's a really important thing. A lot of people didn't understand that, right? Yeah, you know, they're essentially mounted on these platforms, and then you pick up the entire platform and move out, and they're all just connected by wire. So you can literally take all the panels off, put them back on if you need to. And they're also not mounted at that higher angle anymore. So one of the big technologies with solar panels is they've gone to the lower angle and they're more energy efficient. And that also is really good for wind, right? If you get high winds and those higher panels are more problematic. So our neighbors got solar really early on. Their panels are they're up like a 70-degree. Our panels are at 20. So,
Yeah, they're
you can barely see it.
easily hidden behind a parapet.
Yeah,
Yes.
most parapets are high. That's required too.
Nice.
So any questions, any thoughts? Give me your own feedback. What else we
Yeah,
did?
Good report.
Yeah.
How's Mary this morning?
She's doing okay.
Good
Yeah,
night.
so my mom, she's doing all right. She was in good spirits this morning. She's a little feisty, which means that she's getting back. Yeah, she's kind of yelling at me. So
Good.
that's normal mom activity. Yes, but she's doing better. She's in the hospital. So she's all right. You know, send her text, prayers. She would love your prayers. I'll give an update in the second service.
Well, this is very hopeful. You know, I had anticipated that it would be, oh, we did the audit and it's really awful. And we
It's very
had such a
encouraging.
challenge. It's just great that you got moving on it.
Yeah, well, and it's been a little pulling, right? I mean, it's been a little kicking and screaming, but we're getting there. Not too bad. And, you know, as you all know, I can be a dog with a bone and certain things like this. It's like, and I care because, you know, I care because I grew up in this church. My parents are in this church, you got multi-generations, and my daughter's in this church. And what world are we gonna leave her? I mean, and at the end of the day, like, you know, if we're not smart about the stewardship of these things, will my daughter have the fiscal opportunity to be in a church like this? You know, will we have spent so much money on energy and no one can maintain the building? Right? Like, what are we doing long term for our fiscal stewardship, for our eco stewardship? Like, I want to make sure that I leave things in a better place for her and her children. And so, you know, I feel like I have a duty as somebody who was raised in the church across generations to try to do that. And, you know, if I'm not doing that, then, you know, how can I really get up there and honestly speak from the pulpit about how we care for these things, right? Like, Jesus cared so much about children. This is the part of that care.
Well, I mean, we're doing two things, you know, we are reducing our carbon footprint. As if the building was a problem, we're fixing those things, but we're also growing within our community and people are being leaders and inspiring others to make changes too.
That's right.
So it goes beyond the walls. So yeah, we can fix the building, but we're also, you know, creating change just by communicating and being with one another. So
Well, and
it's
people
inspiring.
are looking to our model. I mean, I worked with a huge church up in Denver that's probably twice the size of this one. It's got a whole city block. And they're looking at us and we're talking to them and they're thinking about like, how do they make their homeless lunch stacks more eco-conscious, right? Like they're giving out lots of plastic and stuff. So we're having really cool conversations, but it's because we're incubating all of this, right? Which is what our faith is about.
Excellent.
So the passion of the two of you is catching.
Oh, good. Good.
It's very impressive.
Stop recording. Thank you, Jim.
Anyway,